Before we begin, if you enjoy deep football stories that go beyond goals, trophies, and matchday headlines, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps keep these long-form stories alive, because some of football's most fascinating journeys aren't about what happens on the pitch, but about how rivalries evolve, wounds heal, and perspectives change with time. For much of modern English football history, few rivalries felt as personal, as emotional, or as immovable as the divide between Liverpool and Manchester United. At the very center of that divide stood Gerrard and Gary Neville, two men who represented not just their clubs, but entire identities. To the outside world, they were captains, leaders, and England teammates. To each other, for many years, they were symbols of everything the other side stood against. During their playing careers, Gerrard and Neville did not merely dislike one another. Gerrard has since admitted that the feeling was closer to genuine hatred. This wasn't performative or exaggerated for the cameras. It was real, deep-rooted, and shaped by years of cultural conditioning. Liverpool versus Manchester United was never just another fixture. It was history, politics, class, pride, and inheritance all rolled into 90 minutes. From a young age, both players were raised to believe that respect for the rival was weakness. When they arrived on the England scene together in the late 1990s, that baggage came with them. On paper, England's so-called golden generation should have dominated international football. They had talent, experience, and leaders from the biggest clubs in the country. In reality, they were fractured long before they ever stepped onto the pitch. Gerrard later described the group as egotistical losers, not because they lacked ability, but because they failed to leave club rivalries at the door. Spoken openly about the hypocrisy of those England camps. Players would laugh together at breakfast, train side by side, and pretend there was unity. The moment a Liverpool player stood next to a Manchester United player in the tunnel, the truth resurfaced. Old grudges returned instantly. Gerrard admitted that he and Neville would look at each other not as teammates, but as enemies temporarily forced into the same shirt. That tension poisoned the environment. It wasn't always loud or dramatic, but it was constant. Little comments, subtle digs, cold silences, a lack of trust in key moments. England didn't fail because they lacked quality. They failed because they lacked genuine togetherness. And Gerrard, looking back with maturity, placed responsibility on himself and others for not being bigger than the rivalry. Nothing encapsulated that rivalry more clearly than the infamous tapping up incident of 2004. England were at the European Championships, and Gerrard was one of the most coveted midfielders in the world. Sir Alex Ferguson, never shy about psychological warfare, decided to test the impossible. He instructed Gary Neville to approach Gerrard directly and sound him out about a move to Manchester United. Neville followed orders, went to Gerrard's hotel room and raised the subject casually, as if suggesting a change of boots rather than a seismic shift in football history. Gerrard's response was immediate and instinctive. Within seconds, he shut it down completely. He told Neville he would never leave Liverpool, that his family would never be able to live with it, and that the idea itself was absurd. Gerrard reflected on the moment with disbelief. He genuinely wondered whether Neville was serious or joking. In his mind, the consequences of such a move weren't just professional, they were personal and potentially dangerous. He famously said he feared he would be shot if he ever crossed that divide. Whether exaggerated or not, the statement revealed how intense the rivalry felt from inside. For Neville, rejection wasn't personal. He understood the landscape, but the interaction cemented the emotional distance between them. They were never going to be friends while their boots were still on. Their identities were too intertwined with their clubs, and neither was willing to compromise that loyalty for anything, not even England. For years, that dynamic remained unchanged. They shook hands when required, played alongside each other when selected, and then returned to opposite corners when the international window closed. The animosity wasn't always visible, but it was always there, shaping body language, conversations, and attitudes. Retirement changed everything. When the boots came off, the noise faded. The weekly battles ended. Slowly, without the pressure of representing a fan base every weekend, perspective began to creep in. Gerrard and Neville no longer needed to protect their tribes. They were no longer symbols. They were just former players navigating life after football. The first real shift came through media work. Television, podcasts, panel shows forced interaction in a way football never had. Sitting across from each other in studios debating tactics instead of tackles, they began to see different sides of one another. The anger that once felt necessary now felt outdated. What replaced it wasn't instant friendship, but understanding. Gerrard recognized Neville's intelligence and honesty. Neville recognized Gerrard's integrity and leadership. They didn't rewrite history or pretend the rivalry never existed. Instead, they reframed it by the early 2020s. Their relationship had evolved into something unexpected, playful, sharp-tongued, banter built on mutual respect. They insulted each other openly, but without venom. The jokes landed because the hostility was gone. One of the most telling moments came in November 2024 during a FaceTime call for the overlap on tour when Gerrard spotted Neville unexpectedly. In the frame, his reaction was immediate and unfiltered. He told him to F** off with a grin that made it clear this was no longer hatred, but familiarity. popularity. The clip went viral not because of the language but because of what it represented. Two former enemies, now comfortable enough to laugh publicly. Another running joke emerged around Jamie Carragher. Gerrard often teases Neville for robbing him of his best friend, as Carragher and Neville became one of Sky Sports' most recognizable punditry pairings. What once would have been unthinkable now became a source of humor. Gerrard wasn't genuinely bitter. He was amused by how football life had rearranged relationships in unexpected ways. Behind the jokes, there was something more solid forming. Respect, not the forced respect of post-match interviews, but the earned respect that comes from shared experience. Both men understood the pressure of captaining giant clubs, the scrutiny of England failures, and the strange emptiness that follows retirement. That respect extended beyond words. In 2023, Gerrard and Neville both quietly donated £5,000 each to help the England deaf women's football team reach the World Championships. There was no rivalry there, no cameras needed. Just two former players using their platforms for something bigger than themselves. By 2026, their relationship had settled into a unique balance. They were not best friends, and they didn't pretend to be. But they were comfortable allies, capable of disagreement without hostility and humor without bitterness. The hatred that once defined them had softened into perspective. Looking back, Gerrard has been brutally honest about his regrets. He has said that if he could change one thing about his career, it would be how England players allowed club rivalry to poison the national team. His relationship with Neville stands as living proof of that lesson. What felt impossible in 2004 became natural 2 decades later. Their story isn't about betrayal or reconciliation in the dramatic sense. It's about growth, about how time strips away tribal identity and leaves behind shared humanity. Gerrard and Neville didn't change who they were. They simply stopped needing to fight in the end. Their journey mirrors football itself. Intense, emotional, divided in the moment, capable of reflection once the final whistle blows. Hatred gave way to understanding. Rivalry transformed into respect. And in that evolution, both men found something England never quite managed. On the pitch, unity without losing identity. Their story reminds us that football rivalries are powerful, but they don't have to be permanent. Sometimes, the strongest statement isn't victory or defeat, the ability to move forward once the battle is over. As the years pass, both Gerrard and Neville have become more reflective about the era that shaped them. Distance has allowed them to see how emotion often outweighed logic, and how loyalty, while admirable, sometimes became a barrier rather than a strength. Neither man disowns the rivalry they lived by, but both now acknowledge that it consumed energy that could have been used more productively, especially in an England shirt that demanded unity above all else. There is also a shared understanding now of the pressure they were under as young men. Captaining Liverpool and Manchester United came with expectations that went far beyond football. Every word, gesture and performance was scrutinized, and any sign of softness toward the rival was treated as betrayal. In that environment, hatred wasn't just personal feeling, it was almost a job requirement. Recognizing that has allowed both men to forgive not just each other, themselves. Their modern interactions often highlight how much they actually have in common. Both are students of the game, both are deeply analytical, and both care intensely about football culture in England. When they debate tactics or leadership on air, there is a mutual seriousness beneath the jokes. They challenge each other not to score points, but to sharpen ideas, something that would have been impossible during their playing days. Gerrard has also spoken about how seeing Neville thrive in media changed his perception. Instead of viewing him purely through the lens of Manchester United, he began to see him as a professional navigating life after football, much like himself. That realization humanized a figure who had once represented nothing but opposition. The same was true in reverse. As Neville gained insight into the weight Gerrard carried as Liverpool captain during years of near misses and expectation in many ways, their relationship has become symbolic for fans who grew up during the peak of the rivalry. Supporters who once mirrored that hatred now watch two former icons laugh, argue, and collaborate, and are forced to confront their own inherited animosities. It doesn't erase history, but it reframes it, showing that rivalry can evolve without losing its meaning. Ultimately, the story of Gerrard and Gary Neville is less about footballing rivalry and more about time. Time changes, priorities, softens sharp edges and reveals what truly matters. What began as genuine hatred has matured into respect, humor, and perspective. And in that transformation they have shown that even the fiercest rivalries can give way to something deeper once the noise fades and the game is finally over.